Presession Question. I know how to manage my neighborhood group's finances. So select A for definitely yes, B for mostly yes, C for not sure, D for mostly not, and E for definitely not. The results are rolling in. Michael will show us what that looks like in just a moment.
Also, I see, Ashley, you texted me that you like
Oh.
chocolate.
Well, now
That's
you
cool.
know.
I'm glad to know. For next time we meet up, I'll know what to bring.
Okay. So we've got a pretty even spread of how comfortable people feel with managing their neighborhood group's finances. Got about a third say definitely yes, 25% say mostly yes, 17% say not sure, and 25% say mostly not. So we've got a pretty good spread there. So there's a lot to cover in this session, and we are already over time. So I'm going to move through things relatively quickly, but I want to know where we need to focus our time and energy. So what are you hoping to learn from this session? Select A for how to set up a bank account for my group, B for how to account for individual expenses or how to create a budget, C for what a fiscal sponsorship relationship is, D for all of the above, or E for something else. And if you said something else, please type the something else in the chat box. And then I'm going to have Michael help me out with the chat and let me know if there's anything that I need to pay close attention to on topics we need to cover tonight. Okay. Most folks said all of the above. All right, so I am going to do my best to get through this presentation and to give you as thorough of information as I can. But know that if we don't quite get to the things that you want to cover, that I will make sure to meet with you separately to get through the more detailed information. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so accounting for your organization's finances. One other thing that I want to just mention to everybody, for those of you who have known NEH for a while, this actually was a presentation that I lifted from some work that Promise had done for Neighbors Changing Flint a couple of years ago. So I'm using some old slides that Promise had put together. She was the master financier. I know just enough to be dangerous, and I learned a whole heck of a lot from Promise. But there may be some questions that you have along the way that I might not know the answer to. However, we'll figure it out together. All right, so why do you care about your organization's finances? So interesting, right? Doing the numbers, exciting stuff. Why do you need to properly manage your finances? At the end of the day, demonstrating knowledge and accountability of your organization's finances help build trust among your membership. They also make the management of your organization more efficient. They help you with budgeting for resource development in the future. So if you're looking at getting grants or other types of resources, maybe sponsorships, having an idea of how much things cost in the past is going to be helpful while you're budgeting for those things. And it demonstrates accountability both within the folks within your neighborhood group, as well as with any possible funders. It also can help you establish a vision for your organization as well. The ultimate goal of financial management, it's not compulsory, but it's to make sure that you're in compliance with any resources that you're receiving. So if you have a funder that's providing you with a grant, you need to make sure that you're managing those finances so that the information you're providing to them is accurate and that you have some regulations in place. It also ensures that you're efficient. The better your systems and processes are, the simpler it will be for you to make financial decisions and to make sure that you're documenting them. And then just for clarity, making sure that everything is understandable, you know what money is coming in and what money is going out, that you're being transparent with the members of your organization, especially if you're asking for membership dues, they're going to want to know where those dues go, and so that your information is clear with folks. All right, so we're going to go through a quick checklist before things get too busy. A lot of times we have folks ask us, how do you get a bank account or how do you register your organization? In order to receive a bank account, most institutions that we've worked with in supported neighborhood groups require that your organization have a DBA and an EIN. DBA is a doing business as, and EIN is an employer identification number. It protects your name. It provides you with identification, and if you're getting grants, it's something that is typically required for most grant-making organizations. It's also valuable if you want to set up a bank account. You can register for that information with the county clerk's office. I would recommend looking into or giving a call to the county clerk's office to figure out what their COVID protocols are before you go downtown for that. You also want to set up some officers. So just like when you're setting up the leadership of your organization, you want to think through different roles in financial management depending on how much money you think that your organization is going to need to manage over time. Your treasurer is going to record the transactions, prepare any checks that you have to make out. They'll pay the bills. They'll provide reports to the membership and make any deposits to the bank. A signer should be a separate person. A signer of the check is the person who is able to approve and sign checks for payment. Typically, that person is the president, the vice president, or the secretary. Generally, we recommend that you have at least 2 people on your account that are able to sign in case somebody has an absence, a family emergency, is out of town on vacation, or otherwise, so that you are able to pay bills or invoices in a timely manner. And then we also recommend that you have somebody separate from that process that's able to reconcile the account. Reconcile is just a fancy word for taking your bank statement and taking the information from your expenses and making sure that you cross-reference them and everything is appropriately accounted for. For a neighborhood group, the number of expenses and revenue is relatively small. I think the most that many groups have are 5 transactions in a given month. Financial policies and procedures. The primary purpose of having these are just to provide some guidance and instruction for members of your neighborhood organization and for your leadership to use to ensure that there are core standards that are maintained and your vision is achieved. It's also in any case, in anything you do, whether it's financial or otherwise, it's good to document the policies and procedures that you're adhering to so that when you retire to Hawaii, that somebody can take the reins from you and they know exactly how to document your finances or implement other policies and strategies for your neighborhood group. Again, your financial policies don't need to be anything terribly complicated. In your packet that you received, so in the hard copy forms, you have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as what we're kind of pointing as a starter kit. You have a deposit form that could be used to record checks or cash received. You have a payment request form, end of the month report. You could also use accounting software. There's also in there a couple of examples of what a bank statement might look like, what your policies and procedures might look like. Again, all of this is just to provide you with some examples of how you might structure these things. And I'm more than happy to go over this in detail with anybody that is interested. Now I'm going to kind of go into the financial reporting for grants, which is tied very closely to the way that you manage your overall organization expenses. Now, before you apply for any grant funding, you need to think very carefully about your project and your project costs. Make sure that you attempt to include all project costs that you can and gather simple estimates for your budget by shopping online or in person wherever possible. If you're looking at possibly hiring a contractor to do some tree trimming or some porch repair for folks in your neighborhood, it's good to reach out to them in advance of submitting a grant request to get a rough estimate of what you think it might cost, or to maybe reach out to another neighborhood organization or nonprofit organization that does similar work to get an idea of what their expenses are for similar types of activities. The last thing you want is to apply for a $5,000 grant when your project activity is really going to cost $10,000, because then you're going to have to just give that money back and not get where you need to go if you're unable to do any work because you don't have enough of the funds. You also want to make sure that your project costs are categorized appropriately and that they're descriptive of the activity that you're doing. So for example, let's say you have meeting supplies and cleanup supplies. Shovels probably aren't meeting supplies, they're probably cleanup supplies. So just making sure that you're categorizing project costs in a way that's descriptive and appropriate. If you do need a fiscal sponsor, make sure that you're looking for the right partner. I often talk to folks who are just looking for somebody who will just do the fiscal sponsorship for them. They're in a pinch. They have a grant deadline coming up and they just need somebody to sign on to be a fiscal sponsor. You want to make sure that before you sign up with a fiscal sponsor, that you give yourself time to find the right partner. You want to make sure that you are clear about the expectations and how you will receive the money. So for those who are not familiar, a fiscal sponsor is somebody who receives the money on your behalf. In a lot of cases, this is because due to IRS standards, funders can't make grants to organizations that do not have 501c3 status in the amount over $4,999. So if you're going after a $5,000 grant or anything above that, you need a fiscal sponsor. NEH has also worked with organizations that go after smaller grants like $1,000 or a couple $1,000 just because they wanted the additional support of having a fiscal sponsor. Basically, what happens when you have a fiscal sponsor is that organization extends their IRS tax status to your group so that you're able to access funds through a grantor. It is a project partnership. Now, that means that the person who is acting as your fiscal sponsor is legally responsible for the money that comes in for your organization. The check is made out to your fiscal sponsor, and then you and your fiscal sponsor have to figure out what processes you use together to get the funds dispersed so that you're able to do your project. In your packet, I did include an example of a fiscal sponsor partnership agreement that the Neighborhood Engagement Hub uses. It's just important that when you're establishing that relationship, that there's clarity up front about how you receive your money and what's expected of you. Okay, and we can talk a little bit about that later on, but one of the things that I wanted to make sure to cover today was talking a little bit about what a budget should look like. So we work with a lot of groups that ask for grant funds through the Community Foundation, a couple through the Ruth Mott Foundation, and some other corporate partners as well. So we see a lot of budget, and there's kind of a Goldilocks situation here. You don't want to be too specific. You want to have the right level of specificity so that your funder is clear on what it is that you're asking for. But if you're so specific that you're saying, 10 shovels at $15 each is $150, and 20 pairs of gloves is $60, you're going to have to go back to the funder if Joe down the street ends up donating those shovels for your cleanup and you don't need to purchase them. You're going to have to go back to your funder and make a change request. Most of the time, funders don't require a change request if it fits within a certain threshold, but you want to make sure that your budget isn't so specific that you have to issue a change request to your funder every time you sneeze. Too vague, just saying supplies as your budget is not descriptive. It doesn't tell your funder what it is that you're actually doing with the money that you're asking for. So again, it's all about the Goldilocks theory, right? You want to make sure that you're being specific enough that the funder knows what it is that you are using the money for, but giving yourself a little bit of flexibility in case circumstances change. In which case you would say, I'm getting some cleanup supplies that might include shovels and gloves and trash bags. I'm going to account for volunteer time as an in-kind contribution, and I'm going to get pizza and pop for my volunteers. Maybe instead you get Jimmy John's instead of pizza. Then you don't have to go to the funder and say, oh, we changed the food order. Okay. Again, going back to the fiduciary relationship, before you apply for funding, things that you need to look for in a fiduciary. A fiduciary or a fiscal sponsor, you can use those terms interchangeably. What you should be looking for is a good, solid relationship. You want to work with somebody whose mission of their organization and the project that you're doing is in alignment with each other. For example, the Neighborhood Engagement Hub is a nonprofit organization that provides supportive services to neighborhood groups, typically around vacant lot reuse, cleanups, a lot of community events, either in parks or other public spaces for distribution of materials and those kinds of things. However, we don't do a lot of work with kids. And we often have folks come to us and ask to support, maybe children's music programs or children's after school programs. In which case, I often try to work with folks to find a better fit for them, because there are a lot of things related to children's programming that need to be considered, like background checks and liability insurances when you're working with children that NEH does not have experience with. So we often refer folks to other partners in the community that work more directly with kids. You also want to make sure that your fiscal sponsor is being upfront with you, that they're providing you with a clear written agreement about your partnership before you even apply for funding. You want to make sure that you're asking for recommendations from other folks that you trust in the community. So whether that's other neighborhood groups or other agencies that folks that work at other agencies that you know. And you want to make sure that the person that you're connecting with to act as your fiscal sponsor is someone that's knowledgeable and has done this in the past. Or if they haven't done it in the past, maybe somebody that's connected or has a relationship with another organization that works as a fiscal sponsor that they can seek support from. Once you're awarded, make sure that you are absolutely clear on your grant purchasing requirements. Every funder has a different requirement in terms of, sometimes some grants require that multiple estimates are made for purchases over a certain threshold. You also want to make sure that if you need to adjust your budget, that you understand what the variance allowability is. If you have a fiscal sponsor, request documentation on their processes for payment and how you're going to get your grant funds. Collect all of your receipts. Make sure that you have all of the documentation to back up any of those expenses. Track your expenses against your budget categories. Your fiscal sponsor, if you're working with a fiscal sponsor, can help you with this, but you should track it on your own as well, so that if something doesn't quite feel right, that you have an opportunity to clarify that with them. And then again, if you need to make adjustments to your budget, make sure that you inform your fiscal sponsor and the funder before you make the purchase. A lot of funders require that you give them a window of response before you are making a purchase that wasn't included in your original budget. Sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 60. So before you jump the gun and purchase that snow blower, make sure that you reach out to the funder if it wasn't included in your initial budget, because otherwise you're going to be paying out of pocket for that. When you're reporting on your grant, make sure that you include a breakdown of how well the budget aligned with your actual expenses. So you're going to want to show your funder the budgeted amount by the category that was originally in your grant proposal, and your actual expenses. And again, if you're working with a fiscal sponsor, this is something that they should help you with. You need to provide all of the receipts and all of your expense information. In your narrative section, when you are completing your grant report, describe any changes to your budget versus your actual expenses. So like I said, if you're doing a cleanup and Joe down the street brings all the shovels and gloves because he happened to have some from a cleanup that he did before, and you don't need to purchase those, so you decided to spend more money on pizza and gift cards for your volunteers, make sure that you document that in the narrative section of your grant report so that your funder has a clear picture of why things changed over time. And then make note of any lessons learned so the funder can share these with future grantees working on similar projects. A lot of times when you're successful in doing a project, others hear about it and they want to make sure they want to replicate that idea or make it their own. Make sure that you're sharing any issues that you ran up along the way or any opportunities that came to you so that can be shared with other groups as well. Just a few other notes to keep in mind. Remember, it is absolutely okay when things don't go the way you expect them to. It happens to even the most experienced nonprofit organizations with multi-million-dollar budgets. Transparency and communication is what is key. Make sure that if something doesn't go the way that you expected it to, that you're in communication with your fiscal sponsor, if you have one, and your funder, the program officer that you might be working with, about the challenges that you face so that they can provide you with support. A lot of times it may be something that they've seen in the past. They may have some direction that they can provide to you, or sometimes you just need to talk it out with somebody. So make sure that you are communicating with those folks. All right, and so that is all that I have for my presentation. I know that I breezed right through a lot of very detailed information. So I want to take some time to see if there are any questions or anything that somebody wants me to kind of go back to and maybe spend a little bit more time on. Okay, so Laura asks, so are officers separate employees or are they people who are already on staff? So in this context, what I'm talking about is a neighborhood organization. An officer is not necessarily somebody who is officially, is more than likely not a staff person if it's a neighborhood group. It could just be somebody whose role has been identified by the group informally or formally to say, I will take on this responsibility. Any other questions? Any folks with hands raised?
I don't see any hands right now.
Oh man. I went through that really fast. I'm surprised there aren't more questions. All right, so I will give it a couple more minutes to see if anybody comes up with anything that they want to discuss. And again, if you want to kind of go through any of these concepts in a little bit more detail, I'm more than happy to do that either on this call or in a separate conversation. We can kind of walk through these things in greater detail together. As I mentioned, in your packet, in the hard copy packet that you were provided, you do have all of the templates for deposits and reports and those kinds of things. Those are just some ideas to get you started, and I can help you with any of that as well. I see that Trifina has her hand raised. Trifina, what's your question?
And Eartha, you have your, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I'm forever asking questions. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, once you answer Eartha's questions, if no one else had any questions, if you wanted to just highlight a couple of the handouts that was in the packet or included in the link, that would be a good use of this time.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Trifina. All right, Ms. Eartha, what you got?
Okay, my question is, when writing up the grant proposal, how do we figure in the costs for, I guess, the members doing leg work?
Yeah. So how do you calculate volunteer time?
Yes, because we had volunteer time in on our last grant, but it was some mix up about it being under the right column as far as in-kind versus volunteer. So the money really wasn't set aside to just like pay people that was using their
Oh, Eartha, yeah, oh, there you go. You slowed down on me for a second. I'm not sure if it was my internet or yours, but let me try to answer your question. And if you have a follow-up, let me know.
Okay.
So it really depends on the funder, and that information should be in the application document and the description of the application. Now,
Okay.
there is a national standard of the value of volunteer time. The last time I checked, it was $23 an hour.
Mhm.
However, sometimes funders will list in the description, kind of before you get to the actual application template, the description of the request for grant proposals. Often they will include their own volunteer time calculation. Usually it's that national standard, but make sure to keep an eye out on that when you're writing your grant. So
Okay.
basically what you do is you kind of get a rough guesstimate. You want to make sure that you're basing your guess on time that people have allocated to your project in the past, or maybe information that you gather from other neighborhood groups or nonprofit organizations that have done similar projects before. So you want to make sure that it's at least somewhat close or based on some information from previous experiences. But you multiply the number of hours that you think people will be volunteering by that kind of standard that either the funder sets or the national standard. And if oftentimes if I'm writing a grant application and I'm including in-kind contribution through volunteer hours, I include that as a part of my narrative. So I describe for the funder in the narrative that I expect 4 people will be dedicating 10 hours a week for 5 weeks to this project, which equals X number of volunteer hours and X number of in-kind dollars based on $23 an hour, which is the standard as recognized by independent sector or whoever I got that number from. So usually I'll lay it out directly in my narrative so that the funder is clear where I got that dollar amount. In most cases, from my experience, most funders include volunteer time as an in-kind contribution to your project. Sometimes a funder might separate that out as volunteer time. So you just have to kind of look at, if the funder has a particular budget template that separates out volunteer time from in-kind time. In which case, if you have any questions about that, Eartha, and it's a specific grant application, I can run through that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Did that answer your question?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have anything else?
No, we'll talk about it later.
Okay, sounds good.
And Ashley, I just wanted to share that Laura put some resources in the chat. And then Trifina, I wondered if you wanted to comment. You put stipends versus in-kind in the chat.
Yep. So I didn't know if Eartha, she was saying that like they may have had dollars that they wanted to allocate to actually pay residents and not report it as in-kind. And so there's a difference between tracking volunteer hours as in-kind donations versus like a stipend pay. And so you would need to add a line item to your budget, and it won't be like dollar for dollar or that $24 an hour. But if you think about like a clean and green project, and normally like residents, if they cut a lot, they get $20 per lot, even though if an individual may have paid them, it might be more. And so just calculating a fair amount that you would like to just pay someone for their value. Sometimes funders allow those stipend pays to be a part of a budget as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trifina. And then Teresa, do you happen to have the link to this session's materials handy?
I do. It is
Could you pop it in the chat by chance?
Yeah, I sent it out in the most recent email, and each resource is its own link. So I may need to put you know what? I think I could put a link just to the email. I think I can do that. So I'm gonna do that.
Okay, Yeah, so like I had mentioned, in your packet, you have a lot of different kinds of resources that Promise had prepared in the past. You've got a packet, and I'm gonna see if I can see myself here. So I can see if you can actually. Yeah, it's gonna be really difficult to actually see it on here, but you've got a packet that has a template for a financial report. And in that packet, the basic financial report of what's coming in, what your beginning balance was at the beginning of the month, what you brought in over the course of that month, and some other different reports. Again, I think it would be kind of difficult to go through it by physically showing it to you. But if any of those are things that you think would be useful to your neighborhood group, I'm more than happy to set up a one-on-one to talk through it with you.
Ashley, if there's anything that you want to point out specifically, I can open up the link on the screen share.
Thanks, Michael. I don't think that there's anything that stands out to me unless anybody has any questions or anything that they're interested in walking through together.
I just shared the link for the most recent email that I sent out, and each of those resources that Ashley's talking about is available in that. Oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to share the screen, do I? Here, I will actually steal this away for one moment.
Okay.
So this was the most recent email that we sent out, and so there's a list of class materials right there in the middle, so you can scroll down and all the samples that she's talking about are here for you to download. And you can click on that right now if you want. If you wanted to follow along, you are able to do it that way too.
Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. There's quite a bit there. So I think I'm just gonna ask folks if you have any questions or anything that you want to specifically go to, that you just reach out to me directly. I will put my contact information in the chat right now. And then Michael, if you wouldn't mind getting us started with our post questions, that would be super.
All right, so same thing as before. We just want to see how this presentation, whether it was effective or not. Ashley, close your eyes. So if you definitely agree that you know how to manage your neighborhood group finances, go ahead and click A or text A to the number 22333. Again, if you're having any issues with this, please let us know in the chat and we can address those. If you mostly agree, that is letter B. If you're not sure, that's C. If you mostly don't agree, that is D. And if you definitely do not know how to manage your neighborhood group finances, that is letter E. So we got a few responses in here. Let's go ahead and take a look. All right.
All right, so it looks like we're in pretty good shape. It looks like, if I recall correctly, it looks like we may have gained a little bit of information since we got started. So again, if you have any questions or anything specific that you want to roll through, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. All right,
and then the last thing, oh, sorry. I just wanted to point out, we do have the post-meeting feedback poll. So this is just to help us get a sense of whether you think the format of this workshop is good, whether we need to make any changes, whether it be to the way that we're presenting on Zoom or the tools that we're using like Poll Everywhere. This is just to let us know whether we need to make any adjustments before next week. So greatly appreciate it if you could let us know.
Ashley, I just saw a question from Charlotte. I don't know if you want to just message her in the chat, or if you want to answer it.
Oh, I can answer it. So Charlotte, the Neighborhood Engagement Hub uses Quickbooks. Quickbooks is a really fantastic accounting software, but it can be a little bit pricey. You can also, I mean, depending on how many different streams of revenue you have or how many expenses you have, you could use Excel for a lot of these of the information that you need. There's also a service that's in the PowerPoint presentation that Promise had looked into a couple of years ago. That's an online accounting service that has a free function. And then if you need additional applications for it, that is also available. I believe it's called Wave, but let me pull it up really quick. Yeah, so it is Wave, waveapps.com. I'm just going to pop it into the chat here. Laura asked about Salesforce. Salesforce is not really an accounting software typically. Salesforce is usually used as what's called a CRM or a, Teresa, help me out here, customer resource management.
It's a customers relations management system. So Salesforce is typically, if you are a business or a nonprofit, a lot of nonprofits use it to raise funds. So it's a little bit more intense. I wouldn't recommend Salesforce for, I don't want to use Salesforce.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it for an accounting software. I mean, it works well for a CRM, but there's a lot of back end setup that needs to, and customization that needs to happen for that. Stephanie asked, how soon can you jump in with your project for your community? I'm not sure that I understand your question, Stephanie. Can you clarify for me?
Basically, I was just asking, like, if you have an idea for your community, so how quick can you get started or get involved with your community? You know, like, I'm just coming in, so I don't know, is it after I go through the leadership course, or is this more that I need to do?
No, you can get started right away. So if you have a vision for what you'd like to do, you can get started today. You can get started right now. In fact, I would say that you are getting started. So, you know, sharing your ideas with folks that are a part of this workshop series, you know, starting to reach out to possible partners about your project. I would say that you can get started right away.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trofina just mentioned, also it's important to reach out to your neighbors. I was going to say that too. You know, if you're new to your neighborhood and you want to start getting a project off the ground, you might want to go around and talk to people. You might want to find out if there's any groups or any kind of, like, you know, coffee hours with people, or if there's, or people just hang out in a certain spot. I mean, we can't do a lot right now because of COVID.
So Michael also just dropped in the chat a link to the Flint Neighborhood Map. So a couple of years ago, the city's planning and zoning division and the neighborhood engagement hub collaborated on a project to reach out to all of the neighborhood groups and provide contact information for neighborhood groups and the boundary information for them as well. So in the chat, you can find that map. You can type in an address or look at the map and figure out kind of where you are in relation to the rest of the city and identify what neighborhood group is in your area.
And I just want to put in a quick plug. We are going to be digging in a little bit deeper to the neighborhood map. Forget which session that is, but I think it's in the next half. We will get into more of the functionality there and how you can use it. So just wanted to put in a plug.
Thanks, Michael.
Looks like Trofina had
yeah, Trofina has her hand up.
I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to make a quick comment for neighborhood groups. That's, like Ashley said, you don't necessarily need a fiscal sponsor. And so I would highly encourage you, whether it's a handwritten book that you can keep your accounting notes on track your expenses and the money that you're bringing in from donations, or a smaller grant, or even if you're good with computers, that Excel spreadsheet. For nonprofit organizations, I would encourage you to invest in a QuickBooks and their support for that. And so I'm not for sure with United Way, they used to do some capacity building grants for nonprofits to help you with different areas for your board or, financials and things like that. So encouraging you to reach out to United Way to see what funds are available for nonprofits to help you get your financials and your accounting system set up. Because even when you start going for larger grants, that's something that a funder is going to look in. Do you have the bandwidth to manage your own grants? If not, they're going to encourage you to look for a fiscal sponsor.
Awesome. Thank you, Trifina. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I just want to say thank you all for being with us today. We appreciate you taking some time late into your evening to listen to me talk, listen to us talk. Again, if you have any questions about any of the concepts that we talked about, please feel free to reach out to myself or Teresa. We would be more than happy to set up a one-on-one with you. And hopefully we will see you on Monday. Next week, we will be talking about grant funding.